Jonas Vingegaard is a two-time Tour de France champion. He has beaten Tadej Pogačar before. He has stood on the top step of the podium in Paris and heard his name announced as the best cyclist on the planet. And right now, in this Tour de France, he looks like a man who has no idea how to stop what is happening to him. Is Jonas Vingegaard still capable of winning this Tour de France? Or has Pogačar already broken him in a way that no amount of preparation or tactics or alpine climbing can fix? 2 minutes and 42 seconds. That is the gap after one mountain stage. 1. And the way it happened was not a slow grinding attrition where Vingegaard cracked under accumulated fatigue. It was an acceleration. A single punch, 4 kilometers from the summit of the Tourmalet, that opened a gap so fast and so cleanly that the cameras struggled to show both riders in the same frame for more than a few seconds. And here is the part nobody wants to say out loud. Vingegaard was trying. That is not a rider who made a tactical error or went too deep, too early, or made the wrong decision in the moment. That is a rider who was riding at the absolute ceiling of what his body can produce in 2026, watching the gap open anyway, and choosing his own pace because there was no other option available to him. Now, before I tell you what that number actually means for the next 2 weeks of this race, I need you to understand something about stage 6 on the Tourmalet that the highlights do not show you. Because the time gap is the result. The process behind it is something else entirely, and it is the process that tells you whether this tour is already decided or whether Vingegaard still has a move that nobody has seen yet. Stay with me on this because the answer is not what you think. UAE Team Emirates went to the front on the Col d'Aspin, the first major climb of the stage, and they did not just drive tempo. They drove a tempo specifically designed to remove every single rider who could potentially help Vingegaard on the Tourmalet later. Every acceleration on the Aspin was calculated. Every surge was timed to force a response from the group behind, burning matches from riders who would otherwise still have something left when the Tourmalet arrived. By the time the race reached the base of the Tourmalet, Vingegaard had Sepp Kuss. He had Jorgensen. He had the Visma-Train intact. But the road ahead was being set by a UAE team that had already pre-selected the exact moment they wanted to detonate the race, and that moment came with 4 kilometers to go. Pogačar attacked, not a probe. Not a test. An attack designed to end the conversation immediately. 30 seconds to Vingegaard at the summit. 2 minutes and 38 seconds at the finish line. The gap doubled between the top of the Tourmalet and the finish in Gavarnie Gèdre, which means Pogačar did not just outclimb Vingegaard. He outclimbed him and then outdescended him on one of the most dangerous descents in French cycling. At 90 kilometers per hour, on hairpin corners, on roads that are technically open to the public, Pogačar extended his lead on a man who is an elite descender by any reasonable professional standard. He then smashed the all-time Tourmalet ascent record by more than 2 minutes. Let that number breathe for a second. 2 minutes faster than every previous record on that climb. Not a few seconds, not half a minute. 2 minutes. On a mountain that has been raced since 1910. On a road where the greatest climbers in the history of this sport have gone as hard as human physiology allows. Pogačar was not racing the record. He was racing Vingegaard. The record broke as a side effect. And here is the open question that nobody in the cycling media is asking directly enough, because the answer is genuinely uncomfortable. Is Jonas Vingegaard actually a threat to win this Tour de France, or is he just the best of everyone who is not Pogačar? Because those are two completely different things, and the way stage 6 unfolded makes it very hard to argue convincingly for the first option. A rider who is a genuine threat closes gaps. He finds something on a hard day and makes the margin smaller. He makes the other man feel pressure. Vingegaard on the Tourmalet did none of those things. He rode his own pace, managed his own effort, and arrived at the finish line 2 minutes and 38 seconds after Pogačar, having done everything correctly by any normal professional standard and still lost by a margin that would be considered dominant in almost any other edition of this race. Visma said publicly after stage 6 that this is a different Tour de France. That is a team managing expectations in real time. When a two-time champion's own team tells you their man is facing something different, you should probably believe them. Now, stage 7. Bordeaux. 175 kilometers from Haguetmau, on almost entirely flat roads through the pine forests of the Landes and the vineyards of the Gironde. The GC men recovered. The sprint teams worked. And Tim Merlier of Soudal Quickstep won the bunch sprint, coming off his lead-out in the final 200 meters to overpower Jasper Philipsen, who had been positioned by Mathieu van der Poel and still could not hold the Belgian's acceleration when it came. Warensgold of Uno X finished second. Biniam Girmay third. The The general classification did not move. Pogačar leads. Vingegaard is 2:42 back. Isaac del Toro is 3:27. Evenepoel 3:30. Ayuso 3:34. And Paul Cesar, the 19-year-old making his Tour debut, is sitting approximately 4 minutes and 20 seconds back, which after surviving the Tourmalet in 40-degree heat against the best climbers alive, and in his very first Grand Tour, is a result that deserves more than a footnote. But the story of Stage 7 is not the sprint, and it is not the general classification standings. The story of Stage 7 is what was missing from the start line this morning. Torstein Træen. Yellow jersey for 2 days. Third Norwegian in Tour history to wear it. 30 years old, riding for a team managed by Thor Hushovd, who himself wore yellow at this race and knows better than most what those days cost and what they mean. Træen crashed on the Tourmalet descent on Stage 6, misjudged a hairpin at racing speed, made contact with his own teammate Johannesson, and went down hard onto the tarmac. He passed the roadside concussion assessment. He got back on the bike. He finished the stage nearly 30 minutes behind Pogačar, the yellow jersey torn and dusty and marked with the road. That night, the medical team scanned him. Concussion. 4 fractured ribs. Trauma to the right shoulder and right elbow. He did not start Stage 7. And what I want to say about that, clearly and without softening it, is this. The 2 days Træen spent in yellow are permanent. They are in the record books. They happened and they cannot be taken away from him regardless of how they ended. He gave Uno X Mobility their first ever yellow jersey days at the biggest race in sport. He did it by racing intelligently, by being in the right move at the right time, by surviving 5 stages in conditions that eliminated better resourced riders from more powerful teams. And then the Tourmalet took it from him in a way that had nothing to do with his preparation, or his form, or his decisions, and everything to do with the specific cruelty of what professional cycling actually is when you get close enough to see it clearly. Cycling at this level is not fair. It has never claimed to be fair. But sometimes the gap between what a rider deserves and what the road gives them is wide enough that you have to stop and say it plainly before moving on. Now here is what actually matters for the rest of this tour, because the 2:42 gap between Pogačar and Vingegaard is the number everyone will cite, but it is not the number that tells you whether this race is over. The number that tells you whether this race is over is 45 seconds. That is the gap between Vingegaard in second and Isaac del Toro in third. Because if del Toro is within 45 seconds of Vingegaard after one mountain stage, and if Pogačar's team has already demonstrated that they can ride UAE as a unit designed to protect 2 leaders simultaneously rather than one, then Vingegaard faces a specific tactical problem in the next 2 weeks that goes beyond simply climbing faster. He has to chase Pogačar. But every time he chases Pogačar, he has to do it, knowing that del Toro is 45 seconds behind him and closing, and that UAE will not hesitate to let del Toro sprint away from the Vingegaard group on a summit finish if the opportunity presents itself. That is a 2-fronted war for a team that has Kuss and Jorgensen as their mountain support, but no longer has the depth to chase in 2 directions simultaneously. Visma's only answer to that problem is for Vingegaard to put time into del Toro before del Toro can use his climbing ability to take it back, which means attacking, which means going early and going hard on climbs where Pogačar is not yet fully committed, which means risk. And here is the specific thing about Jonas Vingegaard in 2026 that makes that plan harder to execute than it sounds. He has not attacked Pogačar once in 7 stages. He has responded. He has managed. He has ridden his own pace and accepted the gaps that came from riding his own pace. That is not criticism. That is a rider who knows his own limits with great precision. But a rider who has not found an offensive move in 7 stages is a rider whose opponents have already calibrated to exactly what he can do. Pogačar knows what Vingegaard's ceiling looks like on a hard climb in this tour. He saw it at the Tourmalet. He has the number now. The Vosges arrive in a few days, then the Jura, then the Alps and Alpe d'Huez twice in the final week. 15 stages remain, and 2 minutes and 42 seconds sits between the yellow jersey and the man who has beaten Pogačar at this race before. That gap is not insurmountable, but it will require Vingegaard to do something in the next 15 stages that he has not done once in the first 7. He needs to make Pogačar feel something. Right now, honestly, I am not sure he can. And I think part of him knows it too. Go watch the 2 videos on screen. One of them will show you the last time Vingegaard found what he needed when this race got hard. The other will show you why that might not be enough anymore.